Happy Friday to you, Teresa. How you doing?
Good, real good. How are you?
Doing great, thank you. Well, I know that probably the viewers really want to know and hear, and they're excited to learn about the journey ahead from what we spoke about in terms of your health the last time we were on. And just to kind of give a brief recap, we were talking about your story of autoimmune issues, specifically the chronic fatigue, the pain that you had, and it being diagnosed as fibromyalgia, and just kind of you've gone to different doctors, and you actually went to one who the nurse thought you were some crazy lady. And that really put a damper on who you could trust on to tell with your story and just kind of what you're battling with internally. I remember you had spoke about a chiropractor. I believe there was another doctor before that that had told you you had some antibodies to Epstein-Barr that were just off the charts. You detailed quite a bit about your childhood history and then having mono. Um, and then living in a moldy home. Trying to think of what else. Let's see. It was, I believe, the chiropractor who actually ran some other tests on you that discovered uh, not only the Epstein-Barr, but there were some other triggers that were in the environment that were really hindering your health and allowing your immune system to just kind of run rampant. And fibromyalgia was the, I guess, label that you were given of your story. And so many people, and especially women, struggle with fibromyalgia out there. And it's if you would like to explain this, a lot of times, from what I understand, it's an idiopathic disease, meaning that there's really no known cause, and so it's just kind of this label that they give to people when they don't really know what else to call it. I would say,
Yeah, it's a
but
syndrome of exclusion, meaning we try all these other things. We try, we test for this, we test for that, and we can't figure out what's going on. So we just, although they do have a criteria that they didn't used to have, that you have to, it's bilateral tender points. You have to have 11 of 18 different points on the
Mhm.
body, and I had all 18. So.
That's really crazy. I also want to mention about, the journey of the process of when you learned about this, because I think you also had told me whenever you'd went to this practitioner, they were like an hour or two away, and they were trying to instruct you on how to alter your diet and remove the big five, the big known offenders: gluten, dairy, soy, corn, or wheat. If I'm missing one, let me know. And then what were some of the steps that you began to take? um, After that? Like, how did you know what to do next? What testing were you referred or suggested to do, or what? Walk us through this process to kind of help the people and give them inspiration and hope.
Yeah, so you got almost everything right. That was pretty good for memory. The the first doctor who diagnosed me with fibromyalgia was actually a conventional doctor. She was the first one who recognized that I wasn't crazy. It was everybody at work that I was afraid to tell because they thought that people who, in the emergency department when they would come in and they had that diagnosis, they were crazy, lazy, stupid, or drug seeking. I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to say anything at work then. And so, but it was around the same time that I went to this doctor and she's like, that's she actually was a kind of, she was a DO. They tend to be a little bit more open. They're taught osteopathic manipulation, just like chiropractors are taught chiropractic manipulation. So they're a little bit more holistic and a little outside the box. So she, did all the tender points and I was like, oh my gosh, everything. So that's how I got the diagnosis. She hadn't actually run any real blood work that was like diagnostic of that. She did a couple of little things and nothing, was really horrible. And I even remember doing a vitamin D and it being real low and she didn't do anything because it wasn't outside the normal range.
Mhm.
Then I
Just
on
for
my
the viewers,
was
just
that?
for just for the viewers, real quick. When you say outside of the normal range and they didn't do nothing about the vitamin D, what are we looking at in terms of an optimal range by your standards, and then this normal range by their
Yeah.
standards?
So the way labs get a normal range is it's different from lab to lab because it's literally everybody in the population that comes to that lab and the majority of the values that they find, and that's how they call it a normal range. And even the government has like done this where you're like, if you're not below it, then you're not deficient. So, but truly for our, and I've read lots of research, truly for our bodies to function well, for our, especially our immune system to have everything it needs, our levels need to be like 70 to 100. Normal is 30 to 100. That's anything less than 50 is not normal. That's deficient in my mind. Your body's not able to do what it needs to do, especially in your immune function. So, and mine was like 31. So she didn't do anything. I did have a doctor later, another family doctor later. It was 19 and she actually did something about it then because, this is like way before I knew anything that I knew. So after I received that diagnosis, it was a couple of years that when I started doing research on my own, I read a book by Jordan Rubin. It's called The Great Physician's Prescription for Health and Wellness. And I thought, this is amazing because he actually was someone who healed himself of Crohn's disease. And so I started doing things on my own. No, so I started doing things on my own. Then I went to that doctor in Philadelphia. That was an hour and a half for me. He's the one that found the Epstein-Barr. He's the one that did IVs and nutritional supplements. He didn't tell me to stop doing anything with my diet. He really just didn't say anything diet-wise. It was
Mm-hmm.
me on my own that I removed plastic from my house. I stopped using the microwave. I got rid of all my Teflon pans. I replaced all my personal care products for all natural ones, all my cleaning supplies for all natural ones. I started drinking filtered water instead of tap water. Um, yeah, I replaced all the glass. I replaced all the plastic for glass. I didn't use, anything like that anymore. So, that was, and I started doing things like mindfulness meditation, things like that to work on my thoughts and how I thought about what, when you don't feel that well for a long time, you feel really helpless. It starts to feel overwhelming, like there's no end in sight. It's always going to be this way. And so addressing your mindset, as we've mentioned in the past, is so important. So I just from that book alone, and it's actually sitting on my shelf over there because I really appreciate everything that he had to say. And he recommended certain nutritional supplements, things that would fill in the gap in our diet, things like that. But even still, he at that point he hadn't talked about removing certain offensive foods and things like that. All he talked about was organic, because really that was all that was a big focus back when he wrote that. And removing unclean meat and things like that. So no pork, no shellfish, no bottom dwellers because they pull up toxins. So really trying to remove toxins in your environment. That's what his focus was and in your thought life. And he talked about forgiveness and things like that. So it was a very holistic kind of thing. So I did that. It did help some. I did feel a little bit better doing that. It wasn't horrible. It was like I still didn't feel as badly, but it wasn't until I addressed the viral load, I addressed, things like that, that really started to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
But even that was that was still I only like it was only part way, like I had lived in several moldy homes. It was after that I had gotten exposed to mold again at work in a building that I was in. Um, and so in between the what I did on my own, I met my chiropractor who he was the one that taught me about functional medicine. He's the one that said, I want you to remove these, the five big ones: wheat, dairy, eggs, corn, and gluten.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, um, wheat, gluten, dairy, eggs, corn, and soy. Those are the five things. And nightshades, which are very pro-inflammatory. And I like literally cried for an hour because his office was also an hour and a half away. So I cried the entire hour and a half away drive home and said, what am I going to eat? And that's when I found autoimmune, paleo, and removing those things actually was a huge, I mean, I really felt so much better just removing those food sources,
Mm-hmm.
doing that, and then addressing certain nutritional deficiencies. But then again, it was like I only made it so far until I was like up against the wall again. And it wasn't until I started addressing the underlying cause, like I didn't realize that I had methylation issues. I didn't know that I had, that all these toxins, the mold, I found out I had Lyme,
Mm-hmm.
the Epstein-Barr, because it was all those things were still all hiding. And I also ate a lot of fried food. Like I didn't. That was not something that I was taught until later on. That those fatty acids, rancid fats and fried fats can, when you eat those foods, your cell membrane is made up of fatty acids, and you displace all the good things with all these rancid
Hmm.
pro-inflammatory fatty acids, and those fats can take 2 years to get out of your body.
Wow.
And that creates a lot of inflammation in the cell membrane. And so then the cells don't work the way they're supposed to. So I just like said, nope, sorry, I'm not going to do that anymore. And then the other thing, I also removed from my diet was sugar. There was no process. Well, actually, I had removed all the processed food and the majority of the sugar way back with the Jordan Rubin. That was something. I also didn't realize that I had candida overgrowth. That was something that was, can happen. And then, most recently in the last couple of years, I discovered that a lot of issues start in the mouth. 70 to 80% of issues start in the mouth. And I had horrible dentition as a child because I was very poor growing up. So I knew that there was things going on in my mouth that were probably problematic too. So, I started working on that. And it wasn't until I really got to, so every step, like I got a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better incrementally. But it wasn't until I really addressed my cellular health and also started implementing, strategies to help my cells be well. So nutritionally, di dietary restriction, fasting, diet variation,
Hmm.
um, all those things. That's when I really started to have profound, noticeable differences in how I felt, how my body responded to, and I had a lot of stress. I was single parent for a while. I went to grad school. I was, but there's this, I always worked in ICU and the ER, so there's always a lot of stress, So learning how to mitigate the effects of the stress in my body has also been hugely important to helping my cells because the cells, they just don't respond well when there's so much stress inside the body and outside the body.
Hmm.
So it's been an incremental thing along the way, but it wasn't until I really started looking at how to optimize how my cells work and function that that's when I've had, like leaps and bounds kind of thing.
100%. Thanks for detailing that. And I have a study pulled up that I want to share in just a second. Not share on the screen, but just kind of mention here because you mentioned a lot. First thing I want to say is that, what you say or how you've just detailed this whole thing is that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And you didn't wind up this way overnight, and therefore you're not going to turn it around
Right.
overnight.
Yeah.
So to me, it sounds like it's the consistency of always being your own advocate, of just constantly doing the right thing day by day by day. And it's
Mhm.
progress over perfection.
Mhm.
And this one study that I have from here, it's comes from the journal Toxins from 2013, and it's detection of mycotoxins in patients with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. And they said that the study showed that 104 out of 112 individuals, so 93%, who had the fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome had at least one mycotoxin in their urine sample. At almost 30% had two or more different mycotoxins in their urine. And so when you just talk about the prevalence of water damaged buildings, whether they're residential, meaning homes, or commercial, meaning work buildings, it's almost a greater than 50% of how many people have a susceptibility to being exposed to mold. Because almost, I would say all of us probably are at some point, but how well are our bodies able to process and excrete the toxins out? Because when we start to add in things from our diet that we unknowingly don't know we're putting into us, maybe we're on lots of antibiotics as a child, or we're taking prescription medications or over-the-counter medications. These things are what subtly add up over the many years and really gum up the system and then really cause that blanket of inflammation to drape over our cell, meaning that the raw material, the good things, the nutrients, and the minerals can't get in. But at the same time, the energy that your cell generates from our powerhouses create a byproduct of waste that can't get out. And so then our cells naturally degrade. So here you are doing the right things with diet, with exercise, with mental awareness and your thought life, even supplementation. But how much of that is actually making a good benefit? Probably some, but still at the end of the day, it's like it's a Band-Aid. And it wasn't until you actually reduced the inflammation levels in your body and removed toxin exposure and assisted your body to deal with this overload that you were truly able to overcome. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things, and we talk about, removing the source. So making sure that you're not being constantly, continually exposed, but also removing removing the toxins from your cells. One of the things that I learned in one of the doctors that I studied under was how to effectively nourish the cell membrane, but
Mhm.
also remove the toxins. You obviously want to remove, like if you're living in a moldy home, either move or get your house remediated. And not all mold testing is the same. We could definitely have a whole nother podcast about that. Like there's definitely a way to do it and a way not to do it. And so finding somebody who knows what they're doing and how to test properly is super important. So removing yourself from the source, but also then, there's most toxins when they get stored in the body, get stored deep in the tissue, deep in the
Mhm.
cells. And so when the cells are inflamed, it makes, and when there's a biofilm present, so a biofilm is created by the body as a protective mechanism, but it can sometimes go haywire. In nature, a biofilm is like this. In nature, water moves through the pond and everything's pretty, and the rocks on the side of the pond are beautiful. As the water slows down and begins to stagnate, then we get that slicky, slimy.
Mhm.
That's a biofilm in nature. In our mouth, the biofilm is plaque. Plaque buildup is
Yeah.
a biofilm. Biofilms line the mucosal linings in our lungs and in our gut, especially, and in our mouth. So when we have these biofilms build up too, not only are the toxins stuck in the cell membranes are inflamed, but oftentimes organisms will hide under the biofilm. And mold creates a huge biofilm in the body, huge.
Yeah.
So working on breaking down the biofilm is super important. I didn't know anything about biofilms until like 3 years ago, I think. And well, no, probably 4 years ago. But I didn't know a lot about them until about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Also didn't know how the cell membrane worked until, like 4 years ago. Didn't know, like genetics, again, not, they don't determine your fate in life because
Mhm.
our genes just load the gun, but our environment pulls the trigger. So we could have a predisposition for something, but if we take care to make sure that we're giving our body everything that it needs, the genes don't have to turn on. However, when you got exposure and you've got all this inflammation, you got all this toxins and everything, those genes do turn on. And
Right.
so, then we don't do things real well, or disease starts to express itself in the body. And when I finally did my genetic testing, this was 2020,
Mhm.
I was like, okay, well, I actually cried when I got that report too, because I thought, man, I'm ill-fated here. And then I thought, no, that's stupid. I can't, like I can't have this fatalistic attitude.
Right.
This is how God created me. He designed me this way. There has to be a way for me to be able to optimize my health in spite of how these things that I was genetically predisposed to. So things like I don't methylate well. So I just make sure that I take the right kind of B vitamins all the time, sometimes extra.
Mhm.
I can tell sometimes when I don't get enough, I feel like I'm not detoxing well, I'll take extra B vitamins. I need to give myself extra glutathione sometimes or extra NAC, things to help my liver to do the thing that it was supposed to do and create glutathione to detoxify well. I need to just make sure that I support my hormones and my mood and my gut and things like that because I really have them all. Like I have them all. Um, and so that is why some people get more sick than others because they are set up genetically for a little bit
Yeah.
more of a challenge, but it's not insurmountable and it doesn't mean that it has to that's your fate. That's just the way it is and oh well, you're just going to be miserable the rest of your life. That's not the case at all. So learning how to detoxify, removing those pathogens,
Yeah.
giving the cell everything that it needs, making sure that you're out of the environment, either fix your current environment or move. I actually chose to move out of my one house because we kept remediating, and it was like, this is costing more than the house is
Yeah.
worth at this point. So
Understand that very much.
yeah, for sure. I know. So it's really just having this awareness and having somebody to walk you through this. The average layperson isn't supposed to know it all, right? You're not supposed to know how to do all this stuff. Even
Yeah.
as educated as I was as a nurse, and after I became a nurse, like I took tons of extra education, like tons of classes. I was really, really good at my job. I still didn't know all this until I intentionally went down that pathway to learn these kind of things. I remember the first time I gave a presentation, I was working in a healthcare system and I was like, I could make a difference. They have a whole center, where they do acupuncture and massage. And what if we added functional medicine on there? So I had meeting after meeting, presentation after presentation. And I got done with this one presentation and I explained all this stuff and about, this case and how we use functional medicine. And I literally had five doctors who said, that was amazing. I have no idea what you just said. Doctors, like, go to school longer than me, had never
Yeah.
been exposed to it. So if you don't have an awareness of it, how do you know?
Right.
So the lay person is not supposed to know all this. That's why coming to someone who has experience in how to do this is such a good idea,
Mhm.
because you don't have to have all the answers, but you need to know how to find the answers. So that's what
Right.
you're doing when you're asking for help.
Absolutely. And that's a great point there. And as we wrap up this video, concluding it, I would think that everybody is different, as you just mentioned, with your own genetic blueprint. And it's what is the correct and proper recipe that we can give an individual like yourself, the necessary material so that you can thrive. Because I don't have the same genetic blueprint that you do. And my wife doesn't have the same genetic blueprint as we do. And therefore, the viewer is going to have their very own genetic blueprint. So there's people who might have gene variants, or they call them mutations or SNPs, but just variants in their genes to where they maybe not be able to process what's called histamine very well. They might react to certain foods that are higher in histamine. They may have, like you
That's
said,
me.
the
That's another
inability
one.
the inability to not methylate their B vitamins. And so we have to
That's me.
therefore take methylated B vitamins. We might not be able to have the proper pathway that's fully functional to detoxify estrogen metabolites.
Yep.
And those can build up and stagnate our liver and turn into, cancerous cells within the ovaries or the uterus or our breasts, stagnate our lymph tissue. Um, I had some symptoms here. I wanted to kind of just read off briefly about, um, if I can find it. I have so many windows open now. I might not
While
have
you
it.
look for that, let me just, while you were talking, it reminded me of something that I just wanted to share. This just very quickly, the very basics of what I do, where I start everybody. If I had to choose five things for you to take as a supplement,
Mhm.
besides removing all the big five that I said diet wise, I always suggest a whole food multivitamin. I have a couple favorites, things that already have lots of fruits and vegetables in them and things like that, so that you fill in the gaps nutritionally. I always suggest phosphatidylcholine, which is what our membrane is made of, and another one that's it's it's a gamma linolenic acid. It's called the brand name is Balance Oil. PC and Balance Oil by Body Bio are two of my favorite oils. Help really nourish the cells and displace all the bad fat so that we get the good fat back.
Mhm.
I always recommend a methylated B complex. Even if you don't have that gene, whether you know it or not, you're taking the right form, because we can eat folic acid in our food, but when you have that genetic predisposition, you don't take the folic acid and convert it to the usable form. So that's why you
Right.
give yourself the usable form. So you could have a diet full of folic acid and not be able to use it. And then I always recommend, rotating through different probiotics. Our microbiome turns over every 3 months, and so we need
Mhm.
a variety of what we put in there. a lot of times when we're detoxifying, we need a good multi-mineral, trace minerals. Sometimes the multivitamin will have enough in, sometimes you need extra.
Mhm.
And then I just added, those are five. So I just added like vitamin D and K, like you need that. Most people are deficient. You can
Right.
get enough by going out in the sun every day for 15 minutes, but most people don't do that. And especially in the winter, we don't go outside with sleeves, short sleeves and shorts. Those are the things that I would just recommend right off the bat. And so if you wanted to do something just to help yourself get started, start there. And then,
Yeah.
then you can have someone like me help guide you into how to support your liver, how to support your other detox pathways, how to
Hmm.
break down the biofilm, how to identify the pathogens, how to remove the pathogens, how to remove the toxin exposure, how to do all the things that we do, how to balance your hormones, how to nourish your, because hormone, that's another whole nother topic. Blood work may say it's normal. That doesn't mean your hormones are normal.
Right.
So, all right, so go for it. Symptoms.
Really good point. And so symptoms for people that have these clusters, I would say, of symptoms, not just one, but there's multiple here when they're dealing with a chronic fatigue that's been persistent for 6 months at least. And it's something that you can't shake. And I think from our previous video, you had said you were telling your husband that no, it's not like I'm sleeping and go down and it's like this chronic exhaustion, like where I'm wearing a lead apron that they put on you to get
Yes.
x-rayed, and I'm
Yeah.
just weighed down and just beaten to the core of just exhaustion. So
Yes.
this type of fatigue and the,
Profound. It's not sleepy. It's not like I could just close my eyes and go to sleep because I'm sleepy. No, this is fatigue like wearing a backpack full of bricks every day.
walking through cement, wet
Walking
cement.
through cement. Yes.
So these clusters of symptoms would be things that combined, I wouldn't say all of them, but if you can resonate with multiple of these, like um, maybe it fits the criteria for a fibromyalgia-like diagnosis, maybe not, but definitely we see this in chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. So disturbed sleep patterns. This is maybe not going to bed whenever you want to go to bed, or you're waking up, you're not feeling refreshed, ready to take on your day after going to sleep. Visual and cognitive impairments, anxiety, depression, lightheadedness, and the depression, by the way, that's not relieved by, exercise. Headaches, pain, especially in the muscles or the joints, muscle weakness, malaise from exercise or any sort of exertion, weight gain or inability to lose weight, swollen or painful areas of the lymph nodes, a sore throat, and even perhaps a mild fever. And you probably wouldn't even recognize that you had a mild fever unless you just had a full blown on fever, because nobody really goes around checking their temperature to see if they have a mild fever. But these are a category of clusters of symptoms that they identified in people that had fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yep.
Um, you
And I
mentioned
had
like
every
what
one of them. Just about every one of them. That was,
and then
yeah.
you're right. Many people do. My wife, I read this, I'm like, that's my wife. She's never had a formal diagnosis, right? She's had the Lyme disease, the mold exposures. We've run all these tests and discovered all these things. She's had some Epstein-Barr titers in her blood or antibodies in her blood, food sensitivities because the immune system is just haywire. It's attacking everything, including you. And then you start to
Yes.
have all of these symptoms that pop up just like this. You had mentioned removing the big five: gluten, eggs, dairy, corn, and soy. So that's a great starting point because I know what people are going to do. They're going to watch this and they're going to want to try the do-it-yourself method first. So I'm appreciated that you mentioned supplements there. You mentioned Body Bio, phosphatidylcholine. Um, I prefer the liquid as opposed to the capsules. Um,
Some
it's
people
more
don't like the
expensive.
liquid, so the capsules are great, but you have to take a lot more of them.
Yeah, you do, yeah. I think it's 20 capsules to equal 1 tablespoon of liquid. So
12.
costing is
Close.
12
Close.
capsules. It's
Mhm.
pretty similar in cost if you get the liquid versus the caps. Um, you said Body Balance or Bio Balance. What was the company?
Balance oil.
Balance Oil.
Yeah.
And that was GLA.
Hmm. Yep,
Okay.
it's
And then,
linoleic to linolenic acid in the right ratio. Because that's
okay.
the other thing. Omega-6, and so that's the other conversation for another day is omega-6 and gets fatty acid gets a bad rap. Actually, we need a lot of omega-6. We need four
Mhm.
times more omega-6 than we do omega-3. But where omega-6s are bad is that That's where a lot of the seed oils, the things that turn
Right.
rancid easily. So you want a good source. So Body
Being
Bio
great
is a great
cattle,
company for that. And you
100%.
want them in the right ratio and the right kind of oil.
And I'm trying to remember off my memory bank here. I think I had read an article by Dr. McCullough several years ago about the average American gets 20 to 1 ratio of omega-6 to 8 omega-3, and there, in some instances 400 to 1 ratio of omega-6. And that's just because of all of the types of uh, foods that we eat that are cooked in rancid seed oils, and then grain-fed animals
Yeah.
that eat non-organic grains
Yep.
in their diet.
And
So
that
even
gets
if you
stored.
go and it gets stored in, yeah, a whole nother um, cascade of chaos in the food that they're producing that comes into us, because it's no longer you are what you eat, but you are what you eat eats, and how much of
Right?
that absorb, right?
Yes.
And so now this has been great. And you had said also a whole food multivitamin that kind of fills in the gaps for the nutrition that we don't get to have if we're not growing our food. And, we have our own head of cattle out that we can slaughter and really raise and nurture. Methylated B vitamins, you said a whole multi-mineral, perhaps. Um, there's some other things too, but I mean, that's a great base to cover to start
It's a
off,
great
right?
place. When people aren't used to taking anything, starting with five seems overwhelming. So,
Sure does. And
yeah.
you can quickly accumulate to what I like to make fun of and call, because I've done this myself, a supplement graveyard. And I'm just a supplement nerd. I love experimenting with things and taking stuff and see how my body responds. And so I've got bukus of supplements in my cabinet up there. But it's also good to have versus a whole cabinet full of over-the-counter meds too. So
Right. Exactly.
try to have a little something for everything.
Yep.
But this has been great. I really appreciate the conversation, and hopefully the viewers will comment. Leave us your thoughts and comments on what you think, and maybe what you tried and what you feel has helped you, or what hasn't helped you. Maybe we can steer you in the right direction to helping you find the proper tests, or to get a consultation with Teresa, and to really see if we can actually nail down a personalized treatment plan for you, because I think that's what's more important. We don't offer
Yeah.
cookie cutter
No.
protocols here. We try to establish a baseline based on your your unique blueprint.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Everything's tailor-made. I spend an enormous amount of time thinking about, your plan more so than probably I need to, just because I'm so just so passionate and dedicated. I really want to make sure that your plan is the right one for you. And so I start with the basics, then everything gets tweaked a little bit. So I really pour over different lab testing, diagnostics, and different things, what's going on in your life and how much you can handle, where to start so that you don't get overwhelmed and give up. So,
100%.
all
Well,
righty.
Colin,
Well, thank you
great again as
so
always.
much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I've always appreciate these days. So we'll
Yeah.
see you again on the next one, and you have a blessed weekend.
All right. You too. All
All right, take care.
righty. Bye-bye.